Hello students, welcome to Distinction Learning Platform. On this platform, you'll find illustrations, you'll find quizzes, tests on how you can prepare yourself for an exam. Okay, before we begin our lesson, make sure that you subscribe so that you can be updated with all upcoming videos. To make the story short, let us begin. Okay, so this is the pre-clinical session, and we're talking about cell adaptation, and we're under the last part, which is metaplasia. What is cell adaptation? Cell adaptation is a reversible change of cells due to the change in the surrounding environment. Why a cell undergoes adaptation? It is because it has to prevent itself from getting what we call cell injury. Okay, so now what is metaplasia? Metaplasia basically, it is a process in which an already existing adult cell is replaced by another adult cell. Okay, not the same adult cell changing into another cell. No. So basically, we need to understand to say already in our body we've got what we call adult cells. Okay, we already have adult cells, but these adult cells has to be replaced by another adult cell, not by the same adult cell, but it has to change into another adult cell. That's when we are going to say a cell has undergone metaplasia, or the body is undergoing metaplasia. Okay, so now what is metaplasia? Metaplasia basically we are saying is the process in which an adult cell is replaced by another adult cell. Okay, that's a very, very good definition of metaplasia. And the question is, why do you think cells undergoes metaplasia? Why do you think cells undergoes metaplasia? The reason why they undergo metaplasia because they are preventing themselves to get what? Injured, or they are preventing themselves to go into what we call cell injury, because cell adaptation, so this is what we call cell adaptation. Otherwise, if cell adaptation is not happening or occurring, then it will lead to cell injury. Now, a cell will try by all means to change its adult cell into a new adult cell so that it can prevent what is cell injury due to various causes that we'll talk about. That's the reason why it has to undergo metaplasia. Okay, now on this part we need to talk about the causes of metaplasia. What are the causes of metaplasia? Basically, instead of talking about the causes of metaplasia, we'll talk about the types of metaplasia, and on each type we'll talk about the cause of that type. Okay, so let's talk about the types of metaplasia. Types of metaplasia. The first type is what we call epithelial metaplasia. The first type is what we call epithelial metaplasia. So that epithelial tissue now is the one that is changing from one epithelial tissue to another, either from squamous epithelial tissue to columnar epithelial tissue, or from columnar epithelial tissue to squamous epithelial tissue. Okay, so we'll start with the first one. Roman numeral 1. We'll start with this one. So let us talk about the squamous metaplasia. Squamous metaplasia. So what's the definition of squamous metaplasia? Squamous metaplasia is where the epithelial tissue is changing into another tissue. Basically, it is changing into squamous tissue. Maybe it's changing from columnar tissue into the what? squamous epithelial tissue. That is the squamous metaplasia. So what am I simply saying? I'm telling you guys to say squamous metaplasia occurs. So occurs when tissues from columnar epithelium to squamous epithelium. Okay, so that is the definition of squamous metaplasia, where a tissue is changing from columnar epithelium into what? The squamous epithelium. Now, what could be the good example of that, where a tissue will change from columnar then going to squamous? Which one? So remember that, let's talk about the respiratory tract. So for those smokers, so that smoke particles, so that smoke contains particles that can irritate the respiratory epithelium. What is the normal lining of the respiratory epithelium? That is what? Serrated the columnar epithelium. So that is the normal lining of the what? Respiratory tract. So now that irritation can lead to what? That smoke particles can lead to what? The damage to those that epithelium, because it is not strong to adapt to that type of what? Smoke particles. So what happens now? The stem cells within the respiratory tract, they are going to start what? They are going to start reprogramming that production of epithelium into what? Squamous epithelium. Why producing squamous epithelium? Because squamous epithelium can withstand those smoke particles that is coming into what? The respiratory tract. Okay, but you can think that this is a good way. Yeah, quite right. Cell adaptation is happening under that example. But if you look at the squamous epithelium, it doesn't have cilia, which helps to wipe out the dust particles from the respiratory tract, and also those squamous epithelium cannot produce what? Mucus. Basically, that is the other bad part of developing into what? Squamous epithelium. And remember that if there is metaplasia, remember that metaplasia can also develop into cancer. So they say metaplasia coexist with what? Cancers. Basically, if we are talking about the respiratory tract, it can coexist with what? Lung cancer. Okay. So what is a good example? And under that, we are saying respiratory tract. So we are saying that here, we are saying respiratory tract. The respiratory tract changing into stratified squamous epithelium. Okay. So that's about the squamous metaplasia. Okay. What is the other type? What is the other type? Okay, the other type is the columnar metaplasia. So what is the other type? The other type is columnar metaplasia. Where do you think columnar metaplasia can occur? So squamous, it is basically happening in the what? The respiratory tract. But the other good example you can say also in the cervix. If there is chronic infection there, the cervix can change into what? Squamous epithelium here. Okay, if you want to add another one on B. Okay, then columnar metaplasia, where can it occur? Remember that it can occur into two areas in the body. Let's say if someone is having gastroesophageal reflux, meaning that that condition, basically someone the hydrochloric acid in the body, in the stomach, it is going back into the what? Esophagus. So that acid can irritate the normal lining of the normal epithelial lining of the esophagus. Okay, the normal lining of the esophagus, that is squamous epithelium. So in the esophagus there, in the lower part, that is what? Squamous as well. So now irritation to that, so basically the squamous epithelium in the esophagus can't respond well to the what? To the hydrochloric acid that is coming, to the acid that is coming from the what? From the stomach. Basically, metaplasia has to happen there, where now the squamous tissue is going to change into what? The columnar epithelium. Okay, so what happens here? We are saying in columnar metaplasia, mean that you are saying squamous epithelium changes into columnar epithelium. Okay, columnar epithelium. Then what could be the good example of that? We are saying the good example of that is what? We are saying, I talked about the where in the lining of the esophagus. Now, what is that condition? We are calling it what? Barrett esophagus. So this can happen, Barrett esophagus. Okay. So in Barrett esophagus means that there is a change from squamous epithelium into the what? Columnar epithelium, because columnar epithelium now can withstand the acid that is coming from the stomach. Okay. So this is A. Okay, then B. Also, there is what we call intestinal metaplasia. Intestinal metaplasia is also under columnar metaplasia, whereby in the stomach, that normal lining of epithelium is replaced by the columnar cells resembling the intestine as well. So that is also the change. Okay, that is also the metaplasia that can occur in the stomach, whereby the normal epithelial lining of the stomach are replaced by the normal lining epithelium of the intestine. Okay. Now, since we've talked about that, now let us talk about the mechanism of metaplasia. So basically, we need to also talk about the mechanism of metaplasia and also the morphology of metaplasia. Okay, let us talk about the mechanism of metaplasia, and the last part to be morphology of metaplasia. So, mechanism of metaplasia, what is the overview of that? So what did we say? Mechanism of metaplasia, just basically talking about change. We're just talking about change of one epithelium into another. So change of one epithelium into another, maybe from squamous epithelium to columnar, or from columnar to squamous. Okay. Now, how does that happen? Remember, so how does that happen? Now, that would be the mechanism of metaplasia. How does it happen? How does it change from one epithelium to another? How? So remember that we said it's not the same adult cell that is already existing there that will change into, let's say, from squamous, then the already existing adult cell then changes into maybe the columnar. No. So for it to change from one epithelium to another, the stem cells basically, there are a lot of stem cells. So the stem cells that are under that tissue, they are going to reprogram themselves due to certain causes, the same causes that we are talking about. Those are stimulus for that. Okay, maybe in Barrett esophagus, as we talked about, the chronic irritation of the respiratory tract. So those are the causes or stimuli to why stem cells has to reprogram themselves into change or to differentiate into another adult cell. So what's the first thing? We are saying reprogramming of what? stem cells. So the stem cells are going to be what? Reprogrammed. So after they are reprogrammed, mean that they are going to now differentiate into the cell type that can withstand what, or that can withstand the underlying what condition. Okay, whether a columnar or epithelial. So what are we saying? If the cell has been reprogrammed, mean that it what? It will differentiate. So it will differentiate into what? So it will differentiate it will differentiate into what? Either, first one we are saying columnar, epithelium, or it will differentiate into what? Squamous, epithelium. Okay, so most important thing is what? Reprogramming of what? Stem cells that will differentiate into what? Columnar epithelium. If it differentiate into columnar epithelium, basically these stem cells normally before being exposed to what? A certain cause, basically it was maybe the differentiating into what is squamous epithelium at first. Now, because that squamous epithelium can't withstand the condition, then the stem cell will start differentiating, or will start reprogramming and differentiate into a cell or into a tissue that can withstand the condition, like the columnar epithelium. Same applies to squamous epithelium. If the stem cells differentiate, they are reprogrammed, they differentiate into squamous epithelium. Basically, initially, these stem cells, before reprogramming to that, it was producing or differentiating into what? Normal tissues. Like what? Maybe it was under columnar. So before reprogramming, here there was what? Columnar. Then after columnar can't withstand the certain condition, then to reprogram into what? Squamous epithelia. I remember that if you remove the stimulus, that metaplasia will also go away. That's why it is, make sure that you need to understand metaplasia. Basically, if you reprogram the stem cells, then they're going to differentiate into the tissues that are that can withstand the condition that is there. So if you remove that stimulus, metaplasia also will go away. Same applies to also hyperplasia. Hyperplasia also, if you remove the stimulus, then the stimulus, if you remove it, the hyperplasia will go away. Basically, all cellular adaptation, the moment you remove the stimuli, then the adaptation will also stop. Okay, but remember that metaplasia and hyperplasia, they predispose someone to have cancer. Okay, so this is basically the mechanism of the mechanism of metaplasia. This is it. Okay, now let's talk about what you can see morphological. What can you see under morphology? What can you see? So under morphology, what you can only see, but because under morphology you can't see using your naked eyes, because you can't see tissues using your naked eyes. So gross morphology is not here. It's not here because it can't help you to see the metaplasia, because for you to see that this is metaplasia, basically you need to see tissues, or you need to see a cell. So basically we are talking about now microscope here. So microscope, what can you see? What can you see? What you can see is adult cells change into another adult. So what you can see here under microscopy, you are going to see adult cells that were at first changed into another adult cell. Okay, so hello guys, so this is where we end from, and thank you for your time, and make sure that you subscribe so that you can be updated with all upcoming videos. And in the next session, now we'll talk about the cell injury, the causes of cell injury, the reversible and irreversible cell injury, the types of cell death, necrosis, and also apoptosis.